Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the IDF responds to a Hamas attack on the Gaza border. The Israeli Prime Minister shares his thoughts about the Paris Peace Conference, and riots over power shortages in Gaza break out against the PA. I'm Aaron Porras here with the latest news in Israel. An Israeli tank destroyed a Hamas military post in the southern Gaza Strip this morning after Palestinian terrorists opened fire at IDF military forces from the other side of the border. The IDF spokesperson's office released a statement saying the retaliatory action was taken after the unknown assailants fired their weapons at Israeli soldiers who were conducting maintenance work on the security barrier separating the Jewish state from Gaza. No one was injured during the incident, although an IDF vehicle was damaged. According to sources in the Hamas-run territory, no Palestinians were wounded by the tank shells. The Israeli army immediately warned all agricultural workers operating in the area to leave their fields and seek shelter during the incident. There was a similar skirmish just last month when armed Palestinians also fired at IDF soldiers working on the border fence near the northern area of the Strip. No one was injured during that incident either. The much-talked-about French Middle East Peace Conference opens today. And even though the Obama administration only remains in power until the end of this week, outgoing U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry will be there. Israel, on the other hand, is refusing to join 70 other world countries in Paris. The delegates from the United Nations, European Union, Arab League, and other organizations are expected to reinforce their backing of a two-state solution. They're also likely to support last month's Security Council Resolution 2334, condemning Israeli building policies in Judea and Samaria and parts of Jerusalem. The U.S. abstention in that vote and Kerry's subsequent speech rebuking the Jewish state have been seen as parting shots at Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from the Obama White House. Netanyahu denounced the UN resolution as shameful and has also dismissed the Paris talks as rigged against his nation.
הוועידה שמתכנסת היום בפריז היא ועידת סרק. היא תואמה בין הצרפתים והפלסטינים, מטרתה לנסות לכפות על ישראל תנאים שאינם מתיישבים עם הצרכים הלאומיים שלנו. היא כמובן גם מרחיקה את השלום כי היא מקשיחה את העמדות הפלסטיניות והיא גם מרחיקה אותם ממשא ומתן ישיר ללא תנאים מוקדמים. אני חייב להגיד שהוועידה הזאת היא בין הפרפורים האחרונים של עולם האתמול. המחר ייראה אחרת והמחר קרוב מאוד.
Jerusalem continues to insist that only direct talks with the Palestinians can bring peace.
ועידת פריז היא ועידה מיותרת, היא נועדה לשרת צרכים פוליטיים של צרפת או של אחרים. ממנה לא יבוא שלום, אולי ההפך, היא תרחיק אותנו מהשלום. שלום עושים בין המדינות. ירדן, מצרים עשו שלום ישראל בשיחות ישירות, בלי התערבות. כך צריך להיות עם כל השכנים, כך נעשה.
In contrast, Ramallah is welcoming the French summit, and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is due to arrive in Paris today. French President François Hollande reaffirmed the goals of the conference in his last speech to the Foreign Diplomatic Corps before he himself leaves office this coming May.
L'objectif, c'est de réaffirmer le soutien de la communauté internationale à la solution des deux États et faire que cette solution demeure la référence. Or, je vois bien qu'elle s'est affaiblie sur le terrain et dans les esprits. Et si on la laissait dépérir, ce serait là encore un risque pour la sécurité d'Israël, à laquelle la France est résolument attachée.
Despite that statement, the French president went on to agree with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that international conferences cannot be a substitute for direct negotiations between the two sides.
En même temps, je suis lucide sur ce que peut porter cette conférence. La paix, elle sera faite par les Israéliens et les Palestiniens, et par personne d'autre. Seules des négociations bilatérales peuvent aboutir.
The summit comes just 5 days before U.S. President-elect Donald Trump takes office amid a resurgence of violence in the region.
Je pense qu'il y a une grande préoccupation, notamment en France, devant la situation explosive actuelle qui existe en Israël et dans les territoires palestiniens. Les violences sont quotidiennes et il y a manifestement, la situation est explosive, la Cisjordanie est une sorte de baril de poudre qui peut exploser à tout moment. Donc il est apparu absolument indispensable à la veille de la prise de fonction du nouveau président américain de réaffirmer l'attachement de la communauté internationale à cette solution des deux États.
The former French official defends France's capacity to be a neutral go-between since it's home to both the largest Jewish and Muslim communities in Europe. Israeli UN Ambassador Dani Danon says that in the days following this week's Middle East summit in Paris, the world body may consider new hostile anti-Israel resolutions. Dan Diker from the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs tells ILTV's Steve Leibowitz that the new UN actions are an assault on Israeli sovereignty and are encouraging Islamic terrorism worldwide.
Steve, the reason that the recent UN Security Council decision blasting Israeli settlements, condemning them, is actually a condemnation and an assault against Israel's sovereignty. Because Israel's sovereignty, uniquely, was twice affirmed in the 20th century, first by the League of Nations and then through the founding charter of the United Nations. And that was to affirm Israel's rights west of the Jordan River.
But not on all of the territory west of the river.
On territory west of the Jordan River. Certainly it did not exclude building and communities where Israel is building today in the disputed territories of Judea and Samaria - the West Bank. And so this notion of condemning settlements includes also the majority of Jerusalem, what is today post-1967 Jerusalem, which was a result of aggressive, violent attacks by Israel's neighbors to the north, to the east, and to the south. And Israel repelled those invasions. And in fact, the UN Security Council in 1967 affirmed Israel's defensive war to protect its very sovereignty. So by this resolution passing, which includes Israel's rights in Jerusalem, is very much a threat to Israel's very sovereignty.
But specifically about Jerusalem, this resolution also, in a way, affirms Israeli sovereignty, really for the first time, in Western Jerusalem.
Well, that claim has been made by even former members of Knesset, such as
Einat
Wilf, that it actually, through the back door, recognizes Israeli sovereignty in Western Jerusalem, but that's not explicit by any means, and it was not the intention of the resolution. And therefore, the resolution is a particularly dangerous one because it has wide-ranging implications for other countries that are facing disputed territories. And there are a couple of hundred of those disputes throughout the world today. It places the UN in a position of being mistrusted by the international community because they are actually violating their own UN legal precedents when they decide against Israel in this way.
Do you think that in an ironic way, this encouragement of terror is backfiring on Europe?
You know, part of Europe's challenge is to understand that the PLO, the Hamas, the Hezbollah, what we call hybrid terror organizations, organizations that engage in conventional terror as well as engage in international relations with the international community in very legitimate ways, creates a major threat to Israel, to the entire region, and ultimately to the Europeans themselves, because the ideological religious motivation of the Hamas as the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, of the Hezbollah, which is the proxy of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the PLO, which is a radical terror supporting entity, are very much motivated by the similar ideologies, certainly Hamas and Hezbollah, to the Salafist ideologies that are being used as a motivator in order to carry out these heinous terror attacks throughout Europe. So when the Europeans come to understand that it is not border conflicts that create terror, it is not socioeconomic deprivation that creates terror, it is religiously motivated, ideological sense of victory over the West that creates these terror attacks against Israel and its other neighbors in the West, then at least we'll know that we're all on the same page. It will allow us to fight terrorism together.
Dan Diker, thanks so much for being with us at ILTV.
Thank you.
Just before going to Paris for the peace conference, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas was in Italy to open the new embassy of the State of Palestine at the Vatican. Abbas also used a meeting with Pope Francis to openly denounce U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's pledge to move Washington's embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. The Palestinian leader said he's sent a written message to the incoming American president to warn him against any such relocation and that it would harm the prospects for peace. The Vatican issued a statement describing the talks as cordial, saying that it hoped that, with the support of the international community, measures can be taken that favor mutual trust. The pontiff also called for a resumption of direct negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians to bring an end to the violence that causes unacceptable suffering to civilian populations and to find a just and lasting solution. This was the third meeting between Francis and Abbas, who last met shortly after the Vatican formalized its recognition of the Palestinian state in 2015. The Israeli government is against such unilateral moves and strongly advocates that such international recognition be delayed until the setting of clear borders through face-to-face negotiations. PA President Mahmoud Abbas has seemingly cloaked himself in diplomatic language while opposing the possible move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, but his Fatah party is showing no such restraint. Fatah spokesman Osama Kawasme is vowing that the Palestinian people will never allow U.S. President Trump to relocate the diplomatic compound, but that if he goes ahead and does it, that it will open the gates of hell in the region and the entire world. The Palestinians are also threatening that if any such transfer does actually take place, they will discuss several means of retaliation with Arab countries, including withdrawing recognition of the State of Israel. Ramallah insists that the move is tantamount to official acknowledgement by Washington of Israeli sovereignty over the city, including areas the Palestinians claim for their future state. Despite Israel's strong record on the protection of holy sites in Jerusalem belonging to all faiths, Palestinian officials persist in the false claims that there will be a change of the status quo that would undercut access to Muslim areas. Meanwhile, the U.S. Senate is now taking action to bolster Trump's position by enacting fresh legislation demanding the Jerusalem Embassy Act finally be implemented. That bill called for the city to remain undivided and fully recognized as Israel's capital. It was passed by Congress back in 1995 and called on Washington to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem no later than May 31, 1999. Hundreds gathered in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square Saturday night to protest against the Prime Minister, asking him to resign over allegations of corruption. The Prime Minister is being investigated in two separate corruption cases, and fears are growing that should he be indicted, the governing coalition would crumble. Chants of, quote, "you take from the poor to give to the rich, a government of the corrupt," end quote, could be heard throughout the protest, and several members of opposition parties were seen leading the group. In one case, Netanyahu was charged with accepting excessive gifts amounting to $100,000 to $150,000 in value from wealthy businessman Arnon Milchan, but no favors in return for the gifts have been proven. Netanyahu claims that Milchan is a friend, and the gifts were only gifts. The second case alleges that the Israeli premier offered to hurt the Israel Hayom daily newspaper with targeted legislation in return for more favorable press in Arnon Moses' rival paper Yediot Ahronot. The supposed tape between Netanyahu and Moses proving the collusion has not yet been released. The tape was allegedly recorded by the Prime Minister himself, however, and according to Netanyahu was meant to be proof of innocence in just such a situation. Netanyahu has repeatedly denied he's broken any laws. Speaking to coalition ministers, the Prime Minister said, quote, "Naturally, I cannot go into the details, but what I can tell you is that there is a campaign of tendentious leaks designed to mislead the public and distort the true picture as if crimes were committed that never were, and all this will be clarified later. There will be nothing because there is nothing," end quote. With their reputations on the line, Yediot Ahronot staff members have a message for their readers. In recordings that supposedly show publisher of Yediot Ahronot Arnon Moses offering more favorable press to PM Netanyahu in return for legislation against his competitor newspaper Israel Hayom, the Israeli premier can be heard asking the publisher to both hire more right-wing commentators and target those most critical of him. The series of recordings from 2014 have been leaked in small snippets to the public and show Moses agreeing to help keep Netanyahu in power. Netanyahu was questioned under caution multiple times and supposedly claimed that the recordings themselves were to protect himself from possible extortion. Furthermore, Moses has claimed that had he implemented such a deal, his staff would have quit en masse. The staff themselves have written, quote, "Our dear readers, we the editors and writers are loyal first to all of you and only then to the one who pays our salary," end quote. Netanyahu has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, and so far, while politically damning, no criminality has been proven. Hamas is clamping down hard on public protests against fuel shortages in Gaza, which both the Palestinian Authority and Turkey say they'll now try to help resolve. The Islamist leaders have little tolerance for dissent, and security forces have violently been dispersing demonstrations against the continuous power cuts in the Strip. Hundreds of people have reportedly been detained over the past several days in efforts by the Islamist rulers to prevent further demonstrations. Police have been firing shots in the air, and a number of journalists say they've been beaten. For weeks, the 2.2 million Palestinians living in the enclave have only had electricity for a few hours a day. Hamas is squarely placing blame on their bitter Fatah rivals, from whom they seized the territory in a bloody civil war in 2007.
في هذه المسيرة التي تخرج من قطاع غزة هنا في شمال غزة هي الاحتجاج على كل المحاصرين وفي مقدمتهم الرئيس عباس الذي أجهض كل المحاولات لفك الحصار وحل أزمة الكهرباء، ويجب أن يعلم الجميع أن هناك محاولات كثيرة جرت من قبل الحكومة هنا في غزة ولكن عباس أجهضها تماما.
Protesters waved posters of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Prime Minister Rami al-Hamdallah covered in shoe prints, which is considered a major insult in Arab culture, before setting them on fire. Arabic text accused both men of being murderers and the heads of gangs, and not heads of state. In response to the riots, the PA has now agreed to temporarily exempt the Hamas government from paying fuel tax for the next 3 months. Ramallah has also agreed to supply Gaza with enough fuel to allow the reopening of the Strip's sole power plant. In addition, after days of, quote, extensive efforts, Ankara has agreed to offer emergency assistance by shipping a large quantity of fuel. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is expected to meet with Qatari leaders in the coming days to hold talks on a more long-term solution to the chronic energy shortage. Being clearly understood by our peers is one of the most important tools we have that we almost never even think about. But for the millions around the world who have one reason or another to struggle to speak, lack of communication can be one of the greatest and most frustrating disabilities. Well, one Israeli startup has created an amazing app which gives the gift of voice. Danny Weisberg, the CEO and co-founder of Voiceit, and Sarah Smalley, the Director of Business Development at Voiceit, are here with me today in the studio to discuss the company's revolutionary app, Talkit. Thank you so much for both of you to join me here today.
Thank you for inviting. Thank you very much.
So we'll start. Danny, tell me about Talkit.
Okay, so it started from a personal experience a few years ago. My beloved grandmother had a stroke, and after that she lost her ability to communicate with her voice. And it made me realize how hard it is for a person to lose this basic ability that we take for granted, to speak and be understood. And that was our inspiration to develop Talkit. Talkit is an application, an innovative application and technology that will enable people with speech disabilities to get their voice back in the most natural way, using their own voice. It's an application that captures the voice and then translates in real time.
So how does it work? Sarah?
Yeah, very simply. Well, first of all, the app is for really anyone with a consistent speech disorder, and this can be children with cerebral palsy or autism, adults with stroke, ALS, or Parkinson's disease. And as long as they have a consistent speech patterns, Talkit will be relevant for them. And very simply, there's a short calibration phase, and where they'll teach the software their unique pronunciation. And after that, you're probably familiar with Siri. Yeah. Works very simply. The person will speak into the application, and the technology recognizes their voice and translates it to whoever it is they want to speak with.
And we can actually demo it in live. If you,
sure, yeah, okay. Please.
So we'll show you a couple of examples. The first example is Orit. Orit is a lovely and intelligent young woman who was born with cerebral palsy. She's very active in society, but her problem is that her speech is unintelligible. When she speaks, it sounds like that.
Now I can. Dad, thank you for to have a normal life.
And now with Talkit, we'll show you how it can change her life.
Now I can.
Now I can.
Dad.
Start.
speaking freely,
Speaking freely.
to have
To have
a normal life.
a normal life.
That's incredible.
Thank you.
So how many people are benefiting from this so far?
So far it's still in R&D, but we already have dozens of beta testers who are testing and are very excited about the ability to communicate in the first time in their life. And also we have a community of thousands of people who reached out to us and are waiting for this product. So we're very committed in order to provide this amazing solution for this community.
How was this technology developed? Like, what was the process?
The process was when I had the idea, I felt like I need a co-founder, Stas, who is expert in this type of technology, signal processing and machine learning. Myself, I also come from a technological background, but not in this specific area. And then we needed initial funding, so we went to the first entity that will fund this project, and it is the government of Israel. The Israeli chief scientist, who was very excited about this product, and they gave us the initial funding, and then other investors followed on, and we won in international competitions like the Verizon Powerful Answers, Philips Innovation Fellows, and 43 North, which gave us enough funding to create the team which is able to develop this innovative technology.
It's incredible. So Sarah, where is Talkit available already? Like, who's using it?
Yeah, well, we're currently in the advanced stages of development. We're doing beta testing here in Israel as well as in the US. We opened an office in Western New York where we're working with disabilities organizations and a university there and with individuals. And partly what's been really eye-opening for me is, I have a business background, and coming and working directly with, our testers and their family and their caregivers, their therapists, and seeing a child or a grandfather, using the app for the first time and seeing what it means to them to be able to speak and be heard and listened to and understood.
That must be incredibly moving, just like to see them light up like that. That's wow. So I guess my next question is, where does it go from here? What's next?
So one of the things that we just recently received is a grant from Bird Foundation. It's a foundation that encourages collaboration between Israeli and American companies. And what we wanted to do with Bird Foundation is to develop a product that will not only run on tablets and iPhones, and because many people with speech and motor disability, they have hard time to have this device on themselves, but to develop the ultimate device for them, a wearable device which looks cool and small and will help them to communicate everywhere they go. And the Bird Foundation have decided to fund this project of the first time a wearable device that will help people with speech disabilities to get their voice back.
That's incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very excited to see how this turns out for you. I mean, just having everybody, being able to communicate the way that they want and deserve to is amazing. So thank you so
very much. We're very excited to help millions of people get their voice back.
A SpaceX Falcon rocket was launched from California yesterday, returning the company to flight for the first time since a fiery launch pad explosion in September. The 230-foot rocket launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base yesterday morning, delivering 10 satellites into orbit for Iridium Communications Incorporated. SpaceX founder and entrepreneur Elon Musk's ambitious flight plans had been grounded since an explosion occurred during fueling, ahead of a pre-flight test in Florida on September 1st. The explosion destroyed a $62 million SpaceX booster and a $200 million Israeli communications satellite that it was to put into orbit 2 days later. Accident investigators determined that a canister of helium that burst inside the rocket's second-stage liquid oxygen tank triggered the explosion. The canister is being redesigned, but until then, SpaceX is addressing the issue by modifying its fueling procedures. Yesterday's launch was the first in a series that plans to upgrade Iridium's global communications network. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. There's a lot of exciting news going around right now, but what word do you use when you're just tired of it all? You use today's word, which is misha'amim, meaning boring. Misha'amim is purely subjective, of course, and what's misha'amim for you may not be misha'amim for others. So be careful what you call misha'amim in public. Maybe for you a museum is misha'amim, or maybe watching a game of golf. What's pretty funny though is that after a long day at work, being misha'amim sounds pretty darn good to me. Let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy with a low of 46 or 8 degrees Celsius. Tomorrow you can expect it to be cloudy, but with a rise in temperatures to a high of 68 or 20 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.82 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching, and see you tonight.